we're just hearing from Umar Zameer's defense lawyer, and it looks like Mr. Zameer is there as well. Let's listen in.
Lose his life. And the Zameer family, the defense team, all of us, we remain ever mindful and saddened by that. So it's not a day for celebration, but it is a day for immense relief, because it wouldn't have done any good at all to brand Mr. Zameer a criminal. He is not a criminal. This was an unfortunate, terrible situation that happened, and as a result, an unfortunate, tragic death ensued, but it was not intentional. It was not a criminal act. It was an accident, plain and simple.
Should this case have ever gone to trial?
No, Mr. Zameer.
I never meant any of this to happen. I am sorry for what had happened, but I never meant any of this to happen to this day. I can't thank enough to Mr. Nadir, Mr. Alex. I can just say this, these are not just the lawyers, these are angels for me. They worked not just for this case, they worked for the truth. When Nadir first came to me, when I was in the detention center, and I asked him, how would you pursue, how would you go with my case? He said, I know it's very complex, but I know I'm dealing with the truth, and I won't leave you by your side. Just before the verdict, he only said me one thing: no matter what the verdict will come, I will be with your side. Now, later, and always been with. So Nadir, thank you very much. Alex, thank you very much. She is someone who not just gave me the advice of lawyers, who has been giving me advices on so many other issues. And Alex, I can't thank you enough. Thank you very much. Thank you very much, Nadir. And I can't thank enough the whole Canada. I thought I and Ida made a wrong decision when we thought we should go to Canada. It's a better place for our kids. But I think today I see that Canada didn't let injustice to happen. So I thank Canada. Thank you very much, everyone.
Mr. Hassan, can you speak to what the last 3 days have been like as the jury came back with these questions about manslaughter in particular?
I mean, I'm probably going to live 10 years less than I otherwise would have lived. I can tell you that. It's been a very stressful last 3 days. But look, juries are entitled to work through their problems. They're entitled to hear from everybody. They should be hearing from everybody. So, you have to trust the process. We have an excellent process. It works, not all the time, but it can work when all the right ingredients are in place. Not all of the questions posed by the jury inspired optimism. However, I'm glad they asked them, because that's how the system works. They asked the questions, they got answers. It allowed them to continue their deliberations, and they got it right.
Mr. Hassan, do you anticipate the Crown will look at
You got to ask the Crown that. I would hope not, for so many reasons. But that's a question for the Crown. I can't anticipate what they're going to do. And their decisions to appeal, it's based on so many factors that may not have a whole lot to do with the law.
What's next for your client?
Well, he has to go home and hug his kids. He's got 3 kids. The latter 2 were born while this was hanging over his head. He missed the birth of his second child, his first daughter, while he was in custody on these charges before we were able to get him a bail hearing. So he has to go home and hug his kids and make up for 3 years of lost time.
Were you afraid at one point that the jury was...
Mr. Zameer up as the verdict came in and he almost collapsed to the ground. What was that moment like?
I can only imagine what it was like for him, because for me it was overwhelming. Yeah.
Were you considering at one point, especially in the last 2 questions of the jury, that they were considering manslaughter, or never?
Well, they have to consider everything that's in front of them. The judge makes a decision as to what theories of liability can be put to the jury, and the jury is required to consider all of the questions that are in the jury charge. So they have to work through first-degree murder first, they have to work through second-degree murder secondly, and then they have to work through manslaughter. So it's not at all surprising that they were asking questions in relation to manslaughter. That's what they're supposed to do.
Should this trial have ever made it to trial, and if not, why?
It should not have ever made it to trial. The question as to why it did is a question you'll have to ask my friends, the Crown Attorney's Office. The question of whether or not this should have gone to trial is not a question for me. That's a question, that's a matter of Crown discretion. And so why it went to trial, it's a question you have to ask the Crown Attorney's Office.
People ask me if your client could sue anyone what he's been through. Is that something is that a possibility? I'm not a lawyer.
We haven't even begun to talk about what's next from a legal perspective. We were so focused on getting to this day. That's what we've been singularly focused on. I couldn't even begin to tell you what advice I would give if Mr. Zameer hypothetically were to ask me about that very question.
What message do you think this case gives to police officers, especially those in plainclothes who are investigating, what in a case like this?
Well, number one, don't lie when you're testifying in court under oath. Don't commit perjury. And don't put up witnesses who commit perjury. I think those are three important lessons to be learned here.
What about identifying yourself as police? I mean, I think it's an ongoing issue of, do you ask the SIU with plainclothes officers, that often when there are interactions with plainclothes officers, the public doesn't know.
Yeah, I think that's a very fair point. What plainclothes officers ought to be doing, how they should be identifying themselves. Look, I do think that this case will mark a teachable moment for many police agencies, for many Canadians, about how we want police to act, how they should act, especially when they're in plain clothes. I think that inquiry needs to be done. I think that some soul searching needs to be done on the part of many folks who were involved in this particular investigation and case.
So the way to behave, the way to be dressed, that kind of policy.
Well, the way to behave among all other issues. I mean, some of their policies are pretty good, candidly, and it's just a function of whether or not they're actually following them. Again, that's not my ambit. There are folks who are supposed to look at that, and I'd hope that the Toronto Police Service would look at that too internally. But I'm not going to hold my breath.
You mentioned there were moments that you were feeling maybe less optimistic as the jury members were coming back with various questions. Can you point to specifically, like what less optimistic moments were you experiencing, and were you worried that they were getting lost in the weeds in the law?
Look, when you're in my position, just like when you're in Mr. Zameer's position and his family's position, you do feel helpless in those moments because we have no insight as to what's going on. So you do your best to read the tea leaves based on what little information you're getting. So any question we get from the jury, we're going to try to make sense of it. And sometimes there's really nothing to be gained from trying to read those tea leaves because we actually don't know what's going on in their minds, candidly speaking. It's another great question for the Crown's office and the Attorney General. Okay. Relief, absolute, an overwhelming sensation of relief. I care deeply about all my cases, but some live with you even more than others. Thanks, everyone. Thank you.